All right, so let me tell Sung-Shim has a background in Christian education, which is it's our big joke, because she can turn everything into a lesson plan. And so every time she turns something into a nice lesson plan, we always say to her, oh, I wish I had a background in Christian education. Because she can, you take and teach, You look at this stuff, well, how am I going to teach it? So she's reading in the book of Exodus as God is talking to Moses in the burning bush. And it starts out, Moses goes over to look at the burning bush because it's a weird thing happening. He has no idea that it's God. And that's really the essence of the Emmanuel process. You're going over to look at something weird thing happening. You have no idea that God's there. And even when some voice speaks to you in your head, you have no idea that it's God's voice, right? And so we've been talking about the neurological sequence, that things process through the brain in a certain order. And it starts with the very concrete physical sensory stuff of, you have to be aware that you're there and see something. And she says, God says, I see you. And then it goes to this mutual mind state where you hear and understand what's going on with somebody. And the next thing God says is, I hear you. And the next thing God says is, I understand how big this is for you. So the understanding. And then God says, I'm glad to be with you. And as we're processing through the brain sequences, matching exactly how the brain processes a relational experience. I see you, I understand to share this with you, I get how big it is. There's joy to be with you in the middle of this. I don't want you to be alone with it. And then it gets around to the doing something. Okay, now what do we do with it? And God says, I'll do something for you. So this just matches the brain. What if we got Anna to march things through her brain in the same order that God did with Moses, so that he became aware that this is actually God talking to you? So let's start with your interest, your thankfulness, your interaction with God. Then we'll say, why don't you just write down is what God would say, I see you. And why don't you write down what God would say, I hear you, and write down this particular sequence. And because she's Christian education, she said, we're going to teach it to people like this. I see you, I hear you, I understand how big this is. I'm glad to be with you, and I'll do something for you. So I'll stand up in our living room. Let's all do this together, says Sung-Shim. I see you, I hear you, care about this, I know how big it is for you. I'm glad to be with you, and I'll do something for you. And all of a sudden, the people in the inner city, Chicago, who thought this theory was too clunky, said, well, I can teach everybody there. I see you, I hear you, glad to be with, I know how big this is for you. I'm glad to be with you, and I'll do something for you. We had something that would translate everywhere. Now, I go probably 2-3 times a year to teach this stuff somewhere in the world. So between the time before Anna and Sung-Shim do this, it takes me 2 weeks to teach this to leaders with relatively secure relationships. If you don't have relatively secure relationships, you don't learn it well enough in 2 weeks to use it. By the time they've introduced this, I'm finding that I can teach it in about 2 hours to most people. You don't have to even be a leader in order to learn it. Actually, the leaders, it turns out, take longer. It takes me about 3 days to teach it to a leader still. Never been able to get over that curve. And the reason is very interesting. It's because leaders have so much anxiety around the area of hearing God that it takes them that long to begin to deal with their own anxiety about not being good enough Christians and not hearing God well enough, and in order to be able to calm down, because there's so much what Carl would call triggering for Christian leaders around the whole idea of hearing and speaking for God. You're actually helping them deal with the trauma around their area. Now, the second thing that I noticed that was very interesting, and that is that I could teach this to non-Christians a lot faster than Christians. And again, the reason was very similar. And that is that most of the time when something bad happens in your life, if you're around Christians, they'll say, well, what is God trying to teach you? So everything bad that happens to you is something God's trying to do to you. And actually that doesn't feel real good. So when you want to go and talk to God about the things that are bothering you, you already go in feeling kind of guilty, beat up, bad, inadequate, a cluster of things that when all those feelings pop up in your brain, they don't exactly make for clear hearing. But if you've never had a Christian background or experience, nothing that happens to you happens to be associated with what God's doing to you. Especially not this Christian God. I mean, if you're Hindu, you might have a few gods that are mad at you, or if you're Muslim, you might have a few issues and stuff like that. But it's not associated with the God of these Christian people. So the mind is clear, and when something pops in, it seems to come in so fast and so clearly that it's nearly 100% success rate. In fact, the only people that I have had trouble with in any culture at any time from non-Christians are people who are active shamans and their spirits have no interest in letting you talk to that one. And so they fire up like crazy. But it's because, you have made promises, you're a devotee of this particular other spirit being. And so that starts you can imagine the fight you get with that particular one, right? Has nothing to do with whether they hear God or not. It's just, can you hear him over all of the yelling that's going on inside about that idea? So, and by the way, usually the solution is fairly straightforward, even in those contexts. And it's something to the effect, in case you're wondering about it, of, do you want to give my God a chance to speak to you? Yes? Okay, then all you others quiet. You want to listen to them later, when you can go back and have them all back. But right now you're all quiet, because, and if you have experience in spiritual warfare, this tends to be all there is to it. Because spiritual warfare, basically, spirits, I'm going to give you my little lecture here on spirits, their power is always out of fear. And if they sense that you're at all afraid of them, they'll push you. Say, well, you just told me that, but yeah, you don't mean it. And if inside I'm going like, I don't know if I'm going to do it or not, they've got me for a while till I deal with my own fear. But once you understand how things stack up in the spiritual world, it has nothing to do with how powerful I am, because I've yet to intimidate a spirit that I can remember. But, just say, well, you know what? My master's defeated your master, so that's all over. Now, quiet, let's get on with this. Then I just occasionally get things like, we don't speak English. Oh, yeah, sure you don't. Because they wouldn't have understood me if they didn't speak English, right? Like, that's the lamest thing I've heard. But anyway, so we get back to our context right here. We're doing this together as a community. And I'm telling you most of this story because I don't look like a community when I'm standing up here. But when I look inside, I see a community doing this. I know all of the people that have told me and taught me and guided me and came in and said, Jesus created a bunch of bee-like stuff, or said, Jesus is saying, listen right now because you don't know what he's doing, but you can learn something if you watch him. I know all the people who come in and say, what you're talking about is way too clunky, and I think we can make it better. And if you're willing to work in that context, then God begins to do something in that community that is completely beyond what we might be able to ask or think. And it's when that kind of community begins to happen in an area that, what we're talking about spreads. And so in that sense, I'm sort of here to give you some inspiration. So we're going to talk about healing and growing a relationally stable brain in the Christian context. And over and over and over, we find that people learn from us a rather clunky way of building joy. But when they go back and they start practicing this with their friends and family and all the rest of it, they figure out an easy way to do it. We try to learn from them to improve our training. But this is what we're doing as a community. So it's very wonderful to do that. So this is healing and growing a relational, stable brain was what the Catholic services wanted to hear. So I'm going to give you the basic, simple outline that I gave to them. We're also going to look at a few slides on PTSD. I didn't show them. That will be, I think, useful for our understanding and discussion. And because we've got quite a, they were all a cold start, but we've got a little more advanced group here for the most part, and my apologies to those of you who are here for the first time. I want to talk a little bit about value systems in the brain before we actually get into this detail, because the thing that we rarely consider is that some things are more important to your brain than others. And that's what the neurologists call a value system. So it's different than a philosopher might think of as a value system. It's some abstract reason. But for instance, one of the things that your brain values a great deal is breathing. In fact, if I was to interrupt the breathing of any of you at this point, a couple of interesting things would happen. And one is that your nervous system would almost instantaneously go to a completely different state, saying something extraordinarily important is happening right now. And then that would develop all kinds of color over the next seconds that would add levels of complexity to that as other value systems within your brain kicked in and go, yeah, me too, me too, me too. So there's something we value about breathing. And when I say it, I don't, none of us argue, right? The second value system that kicks in is actually a body value system, which has to do with carbon dioxide levels. As the carbon dioxide levels raise in your body, a slower acting value system begins to kick on and go, wait a minute, I'm feeling more and more carbon dioxide. That's that urge that I feel like I have to breathe now. That doesn't happen right at the start. But as this other value system comes in, our signals and our intensity and our passion about breathing dramatically increases. Right? The longer this goes on, the higher the carbon dioxide goes. An unpleasant enough thought, to leave it there. But you see how right there we've got two value systems within your brain. And there's other things that can happen your brain completely ignores. So one of the things about us as human beings is we pay no attention to all kinds of stuff. And because our brain doesn't value it at all. And what we do value starts out particularly closely related to the relational context. So now, when we're talking about the brain value systems, the neurological backdrop is that relatively few cells control them. And they have an impact on all the brain. So this is, by the way, if you're interested, it's the work of Tononi and Edelman. Edelman got the Nobel Prize for the brain reentry circuits and stuff like that. So if you want to, do your footnotes and want to go read Tononi and Edelman, good luck. Have fun. Very few cells control a lot of things. You've got the picture. So if these cells tell the rest of the brain, pay attention, the brain's going to pay attention. Now, within let's start with the honeybee. You've all heard of dopamine? Well, the honeybee has only one brain cell that regulates dopamine. One cell. But the ends of that cell are distributed almost everywhere in the honeybee's brain. So if this one cell goes boop, every part of the brain, pretty much honeybee brain, knows it had something to say. Right? One cell. So that's a value system. Because if this one cell says something, everybody pays attention. Okay? That has changed the way the brain is now going to look at everything that's about to happen, because this one cell said, whoop. All right? Different processing. By the way, you can train artificial intelligence. You can put value systems in it. So you can say to it, I want you to value every time you bump into a wall. So they put bump sensors on there and say that. And now, by putting a value system in, robots will learn behavior that they repeat. They'll develop patterns because they say, this is more important to me than that. So out of all the random occasions, they will start doing some things more than others because their brain has been told this is a value. You know, that's a very small idea of brain and very rough idea of value, right? So when a honeybee is hatched, the dopamine system in the brain, in their brain, the one cell, fires in response to sugar. But within 3 days, that brain cell no longer fires in response to sugar. You can give that bee all the sugar you want. The dopamine cell will not do a thing. Because in the meanwhile, it has learned to fire to the color it associates with the sugar. So every place it sees that color, it goes bloop. So it's actually learned from its basic value system, sugar, that every time there's sugar around, this color is present. So you ever met a bee that's buzzing around something like a pop can or something like that? They're following this color all around the place. You just leave it alone. It's not for, you know, there's nothing there for them to drink, but they can't leave it alone, right? Because their one little value system is going, that's my color, that's my color, that's my, I live and die for this color, right? So your brain has 5 value systems in it. Now, just again to be clear, in addition to your brain's value system, your body has value systems in it. And they typically have a chemical that goes with them. So one of the value systems that occurs in your body, but not particularly in your brain, is nicotine. So, you know, you all know where you can get nicotine? Yeah, right. Well, here's the interesting thing. If you block the part of the brain that takes signals from the body, you instantly lose all desire for nicotine. Because it's a body value system. So if you block the signals from your body, you instantly drop all interest in nicotine. You just don't recognize that signal as being present. I'm going to call it the marijuana chemical. That's also a body system chemical. Doesn't particularly occur in the brain. And a lot of the opioid stuff is also not so much in the brain as it is, although it's somewhat similar to the dopamine, but if it doesn't capture dopamine, it's just a body signal. So there's systems in your body. You're familiar with some of them, like the sugar system, the blood sugar system. So when it drops to a certain level, you start to get hungry. But an interesting thing is you also have a bulk value system in your digestive tract. So your digestive tract wants a certain level of bulk in there. It doesn't matter how many calories you've put in. If you don't have enough bulk, your digestive system, this value system, keeps saying, oh, I'm still hungry. And the interesting thing is the bulk system is the one that controls your metabolism. So that no matter how many calories I have or don't have, I can have almost 0 calories coming in. But if I don't have enough bulk, my body will say, I'm starving. I can have lots of calories coming in, and if I don't have enough bulk, my body will say, I'm starving. So I can be putting away thousands of calories a day, my body's still going, I'm starving to death. I can cut my diet way back to where I'm getting almost nothing, and my body continues to say, no, we cannot use any of our metabolism right here. But if I put bulk in there, the system that controls metabolism goes, wow, we got a lot to process through here, you know. So if you eat like 2 pounds a day of almost no calorie vegetables, your body will go, we are so full. Turn up all the furnaces. We got lots of calories. I mean, we're not starving at all. So all these people who try to control their, you know, their metabolism system by using the calorie method are using the wrong value system as far as your body's concerned. You have to pack bulk if you want your metabolism to change, because it's running on the bulk value system. So little things like that make a lot of difference. And they run very slowly, because all of this has to happen. Your blood sugar drops enough, then your brain eventually gets the news, you know, we need to eat something around here. Your liquid value system, you know, how much water do I have? And all of you have heard the value system that happens when your urea and your other kinds of, from exercising, starts getting too high and your muscles all ache and you have pain and stuff like that and you don't feel like, these are all slow acting value systems in your body. And what we need to begin to say is all of these impact us, and some of our value systems extend outside of our body. So they're actually picking up signals from the people around us. To such extent that books have been published about depression as a contagious disease, because some of your value systems are looking for a level of joy around you that if it isn't there, will pick up a sense of depression, because it's not getting the joy signals you're looking for completely from outside yourself. Now we resonate with those inside, so there's, you know, there are mirror systems and that, but our value systems actually go farther than us. But in our brain, we've got 5 that have been located so far. The first one is dopamine that you mentioned. I mentioned. You were looking at me when I did it. So I said, you mentioned it. No, I mentioned it. And dopamine as a value system signifies that something is personally significant to me. I mean, there's all these other things that you put with it, but a general category, it's not about pleasure, it's something is personally significant to me. Then there is the norepinephrine value system, again governed by relatively few brain cells but distributed widely around the brain. And that's the novelty circuit. So when something novel, something new, something unexpected is happening, norepinephrine kicks in around the brain, goes, whoa, that was new and unexpected, everyone pay attention. You know, wake up, we need to pay attention to what's going on here. Now, when those two are firing, your brain gets into a high level of arousal. So another one of the value systems built into the brain, rather widely distributed, is the serotonin system, which is the quiet system. Like, okay, we got too much noise going on here, too much excitement, let's all quiet down a minute. And when serotonin says, boop, do it, then the brain globally quiets down to get the levels back where they need to be. And then we've got the acetylcholine system. The acetylcholine system is almost identical to the dopamine system, with one interesting exception, and that is acetylcholine system runs while you're asleep, and dopamine runs while you're awake. So experiences that are experienced with dopamine are incorporated as new memories and new experiences. Something new has happened to me. And ones that are done under acetylcholine, we don't register them as a new memory. That's why when we dream at night, although we run many of these same things through, we don't experience that as something new that's happened to us. Even though the same nerve cells are running the same thing, there's just no dopamine present. And the acetylcholine says, well, I'm thinking all this through, but I'm thinking through memories now, I'm not experiencing something new. So a couple of interesting things happen, as you can guess. Every once in a while, these things foul up, and you start processing memories before your dopamine is completely drained out of your body, which takes about 90 minutes. So then you wake up, you're going, did I dream that or did that happen? Because you got this mix. I'm not sure. The dopamine signal is there, but it seems so weird, I don't think that could happen. Now my father, as he was getting older, became almost completely blind and nearly completely deaf. So he couldn't tell by opening his eyes whether it was day or night. And he was given a medication that ended up making both dopamine and acetylcholine run at the same time. So he could not tell if he was dreaming or if something was really happening. And I had months of processing with him. He couldn't tell had I just dreamed that. Well, here's one that's moderately funny. Some of them weren't. My wife went in to talk with him one morning, and he said, well, where do the boys and girls sleep? And she said to him, well, there are no boys and girls here. You're in our house. He said, no, there's boys and girls here. I heard them last night. He said, well, if there are boys and girls, they each sleep in their own bedrooms. He said, well, then who was the woman that crawled in bed with me last night? And he had been making some jokes about being cold a couple of years earlier, and he said, "Oh, what I need is one of those maidens like David had, And so my wife, remembering that, she said, "Well, maybe it's the little maiden that like David had that God sent you to keep you warm at night." He said, "Oh, well, I just didn't want to create a scandal." But she was having perhaps a bit more fun than she should be licensed to do. But here we have this mind that could no longer sort out, why am I awake? Is this a new memory? Is this an old memory? But this system is supposed to work pretty reliably to help us sort those things out and say this is in this category or the other one. So those are the kinds of value systems that run in our mind. And one of the things that has to happen is if you really want to process a new experience and be awake, you have to get the value system back in the brain. So when you go to sleep, your brain will shut off dopamine for 90 minutes before it'll start running acetylcholine to make sure you don't get your sleeping, your dreaming and awaking mixed with each other, right? But that means when you first wake up, your brain is very lethargic when it comes to any dopamine present. So the value system for dopamine starts flashing, bleep, 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 bleep. And as it flashes, your brain begins to put dopamine into your systems, right? And a few of us use coffee and other methods to try to enhance this process as it goes on. But as your dopamine levels build up, your brain starts to become what's called plastic. It's now working. It's not stiff. It's now interacting with stuff. It begins to recognize that we're actually I'm present. I'm not just in the memory. I'm present, and I'm interacting with other people. And what's going on for me is a new experience. So one of the things that happens when we ask people to get into a joy or appreciation state is it begins to fire that dopamine system faster to get their brains plastic enough, and it takes, again, about 2 minutes of doing this to get into a fairly plastic state. So getting into and sustaining a joyful state for 2 minutes remarkably changes the way your brain processes memory. Now if I pull up a memory, remember, if I'm in all acetylcholine, it'll just be a memory. No dopamine around, that's just a memory. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's not personally relevant, right? So what we want to do is get people in a state in which their brain is ready for something to be personally relevant. Otherwise, something personally relevant will run through, and it means no more to you than a dream or a fantasy or a thought or something like that. It might trigger the novelty circuit, like, that was different. No personal relevance to me. So much of what we're doing is actually affecting these value systems. One of the reasons why we built the thankfulness part to take about as long as it does at the front end of the Emmanuel process is timed out to go with how long do you have to have plasticity in the dopamine system in order to be able to realize that what you're hearing is personally relevant. Now, we don't explain that to people. We don't have to go down to southern Mexico and say, now all you folks in Chiapas, I want you to understand that we have to get your dopamine system firing for about 120 seconds, more or less, in order to get the plasticity up enough so that you'll find some relevance in the thoughts that come through your mind that God might want to explain. If you don't understand that, you're not going to participate. Now, when I deal with the Dutch, it's almost that bad. They want everything explained before they try it. But most of the world doesn't care. But if you say to them, you should enter God's presence with thanksgiving in your heart, they'll go, oh, that makes sense. And if you're thankful, you're going to be able to hear God better. Like, oh yeah, I think so. I mean, there's something intuitively obvious because the brain actually works the way the science describes it. You don't have to understand the science, but all you've got to do is woken up a few times and gotten relationally connected, and you realize all of a sudden, well, yeah, I do notice. It does mean more to me right now, right? So this is what we're talking about in terms of having a model that has built the science in. So there's reasons for what's done, but we don't actually explain them most of the time, and they seem to be intuitively obvious. And the simpler we make it, the lower tech, the easier it is for people to do it. So, take something like eating, right? Eating is normally what triggers dopamine and leads into attachment. So suppose if God wanted to attach with his people or have them attached to each other, he had them do it around meals and feasts and eating something together every time you got together. So what I want you to do is understand a couple of things. One is, you're attaching to me, I'm the one that feeds you. And so this would be like my body and my life, given to you, so that you're actually receiving life from me, and you're sharing it with each other. And the people who feed you and the people you eat with, those are the people you bond with, you attach with. Especially if there's joy around, right? That'd be a genius plan if it actually was played out that way. The problem is most of us have reduced it to such a level, if you think back on your experience, there's no joy in it. We've lost the relational context. We don't even think of it as eating, right? All these things are now missing from it. So all of the effects it would have on your nervous system are now lost. The theological meaning is still there, but it's actually your nervous system goes through all of that and goes, that was a meaningless exercise. And so what if we were actually going to go back into that context where your brain is now turned on, you're having dopamine, and now you're surrounded by faces looking at you in some joyful way, saying, I'm really glad to be with you right now, and what we're going to do is learn how to be human beings. Right? We'll talk about the areas in which we're having a hard time, because that's when we've forgotten who we are. And every time we can help you find the way that you really were designed to be, we're all going to light up every dopamine receptor we've got in our faces and heads, and we're going to trigger that in you so that you get such a dopamine blast coming off of this one that you're going, man, my people really found who I was that time. I can remember that all week. See, this would all be naturally occurring, and it's there in the language, isn't it? It's there in the stories, it's there in the instructions, it's not there in the experience. And so these are again, you look back at it, all of a sudden you start saying, the ingredients are here, they've become inert. They've just been turned into not how we experience things relationally, but just the things I'm supposed to believe in and do. And if I can just do them right, it's supposed to create some effect, which it doesn't. Because it's, that isn't where the power of them is. So we're going to now go on and pretty much ignore what I just said. All of those value systems, they're running in the background. Oh, the fifth, let's see, serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine and norepinephrine. So I skipped epinephrine, or adrenaline if you want. So that value system simply means I need to get energized. So here's the interesting thing that happens. And I apologize if this is a moderately uncomfortable topic, but talk about pornography a second. I actually remember the first time I saw pornography because I grew up in a country where it didn't have it around. And so I was about 17 or 18, something like that. And I'd come to the United States and somebody said, hey, I got something to show you. And he wanted to go into a storage room, and I'm like, we're going to look at in the storage room? And he pulls out this magazine and goes, hey, look at this. And so now my novelty circuit, is that going to fire? Right? So absolutely, there's no possible way you can be exposed to the stimuli your novelty circuit won't fire. So, which one's novelty? Norepinephrine. Boom, norepinephrine was on. Is this moderately energizing? Like this is something, that, my body needs to respond to in some way. Yes, so epinephrine fired, right? Norepinephrine, this is not just something novel, this is something very energizing, right? Now, here's the interesting thing, dopamine didn't fire. My mind said, but I don't know her. Here's a weird thing. Somebody I don't know is producing a strong response in me, and that is, the reaction is very much like the reaction you would have if someone suddenly started bleeding. Does that cause your brain to fire as novelty? There's something weird is happening here? Oh, blood, yes. Is it energizing? Is this something that's, big deal you need to pay attention to? Yeah, so you get epinephrine, it's like, I'm charged with this one. And if it's someone you care about, and almost everyone you would care about, if they started bleeding, you would get dopamine with it, right? You go like, this is important to me right now. I can't ignore this at all. I got to get involved. With no dopamine signal, I looked at that, and it was sort of like watching somebody bleed. It's like, I don't like this is what it's doing to me. This has no relational context. So I was immediately, it was aversive to me, but my brain had such a powerful relationship to it that it's now captured with the idea of how do I explain this? Why does this have this effect to me? How do I go about understanding why this is so much power when it makes no sense whatsoever? So my brain is now in this loop of trying to figure out, why is this impacting me? It's interesting, when I talk to men about their first exposure to pornography, almost all of them will tell me, that was the lucky moment that they first saw the good thing. And I'll say to them, no, that was when you were first sexually traumatized. And they look at me like, what do you mean I was sexually traumatized? Well, let's break down what actually felt like inside you when that happened. Were you feeling out of control? Well, yes. Were you feeling overwhelmed? Yes. Were you feeling cut off relationally? Well, yes. We just go down a list of everything that's like in a trauma. It fits that, except everyone told them that they just had found the good thing. Now the question is, in their minds, at a very biological level, how is it that when I find the good thing, it actually makes me feel so rotten? Right? Out of control, all those sorts of things. And you can spend a lifetime trying to solve that problem, which is very unproductive. And eventually your dopamine system will kick in and start saying, well, porn is personally relevant to me because I don't actually have enough relationships that are close enough to me that they would give me a contrast. So when we get people to process their experiences, their trauma experiences this way, now, with a woman, it wouldn't be the same thing. So suddenly the neighbor flashed a little girl. Would people go, wow, lucky little girl. She finally saw, got to see the good thing. we would appropriately recognize that as a trauma experience. The impact is no different. Except if you're told that it's supposed to be different, you'll spend a long time trying to figure out why this somehow doesn't work for me and doesn't enhance my life in any way. So, but you know, I'm now at the point of almost digressing, but if you want to watch it another way, have any of you seen the movie Awakenings with Robin Williams? All right, you've seen it. If not, you might want to go back and watch it, because here are people whose dopamine system was off, but their novelty system, their noradrenaline system was still running. So if you used their novelty system, you could get them to play ball, you could get them to do all sorts of things using the, but they still acted like they weren't there. So it's a very interesting contrast. You know, basically a case study, and the movie did an extraordinarily good job of portraying what it looked like. Here's what it looks like if your dopamine system isn't firing, which is why the whole thing was about learning to give these people L-Dopa, which is a form of dopamine. Now the problem with giving them L-Dopa is that, remember that dopamine fire is supposed to fire when something important happens, right? Well, what if it's there all the time because you're taking it from a chemical cocktail? Everything is important to me. If you get it too high, when the planes fly overhead, it's important to me. That must be the CIA watching me. And that sound that I just heard, that's important to me. Someone must be following me. And every stimulus in life, you know what we call that? When everything is important to you because there's dopamine floating all around all the time? Yeah, we call it being paranoid. Yeah, because things that shouldn't be relevant to you, your brain is now registering to. And so that's what happened, you get it up too high. And because it's supposed to fire when something of value is happening, and not other times. And to do that, we have to coordinate with other people so that our brains are firing together. We're recognizing together when valuable things are happening, and we're ignoring most of the rest of it because that wasn't worth paying attention to. A novelty gives you a chance to notice something new is happening, but if your brain says, but it's not personally relevant, you will quickly ignore the novel or irritating things. But have you met kids who can't ignore anything novel that's happening around them? It just takes their attention away. Like, they'll follow all the novel, anything that's happening. And you start looking at these value systems, you realize this is exactly what we're trying to do. So what we end up being is like these honeybees with lots of bee-like stuff. And we're trying to teach our brains, and the brains that are interacting with us, what is it that's important about human relationships that we need to pay attention to. And the way you do this is you pay attention to, you're actually pre-wired to look for anyone who's joyful with you. So if your brain can look at anything, it'll look at a human face, especially with babies. You look at a face, you look at the left side of the face. If you can look at any part of the left side of the face, you look at the eyes, because that's where the most signals are of whether someone's joyful with you. And you're tracking that. It's already built in to be important to you. That's like the honeybee's sugar. First response, always looking for that smile. Then you start looking for the things that go with it. Who is the person that always brings that smile? And after a while, it begins to respond to the person, whether they're smiling or not. You go, whoa, that's my person. They don't have to have a smile. That's just my person. So just seeing my person is already a dopamine thing for me, right? Now, if the person isn't there and what you get is baby Einstein, or you get a mobile over the top of your thing, or you get fed a certain sort of way, then pretty soon your brain starts going, oh, here's the thing that always goes with feeling good, And so I become attached to that. I get attached to the screen, I get attached to the sounds, I get attached to whatever else, because your brain is now forming its associations. What is it that should be interesting to this part of me? And is it a relational moment? See, if it always comes with a relational moment, then your brain will start say, I'm looking for relational moments, and I want to stay relationally connected because that's where all the good stuff happens. Comes a pattern right there, right? And then we realize we can all take so much of that and we need the rest. And so we want to alternate between the joyful moments and the restful moments. Joy and rest and joy and rest. And by the way, there's nothing in the human brain that registers I'm feeling too joyful and too rested. In all my years of counseling, I have yet to have anyone come in, you know what, Doc, I'm just getting too much joy in my life. Could you help me turn it down? I'm just feeling so peaceful that I can't stand it. Would you just help me not be so peaceful? You know, and if you look at God's promises, what is the kingdom of God? Righteousness, joy, and peace in the Holy Spirit. What God's promises are, what will He give you to all His followers? It's always joy and peace, joy and peace, joy and peace. Because there's nothing in us that says we get too much of that. You know, if you're going to have a whole eternity of joy and peace, you find yourself going in, oh, I'm going to be so tired of that. There's no, you can't max that system out. So this is, if we build that, if that's what comes with relational moments, our brain is going to be so about having relational moments. But if relational moments don't lead to joy and peace, our brain is going to be looking for anything else that does, and the most reliable thing is going to be carbohydrates. I always feel joyful and a little more peaceful after carbohydrates. And so, and the other thing, eventually, if you get past puberty, is you'll realize that a successful sexual experience will also give you some of that joy and peace buzz. I remember one lady telling me, you know, I sleep with people not because I like the sex, but it's the only time I can quietly be next to somebody afterwards. So she actually was doing it for the peaceful time, which wasn't real long. But the only way in her life she had ever associated with having a peaceful moment together with somebody, what we call quiet together, was you had to go through all this other crap. But it was worth it, because every once in a while in your life you just need to be able to kind of rest in the presence of somebody else, and then of course you wake up in the morning and they're passing gas and all this other stuff, and you know, like, why did I do that? But you know, these things are so powerful and so deep, right? So let's see, where is this? Going to my next. See, here's the thing, my computer and this are not connected, so unsynchronized. So I have to review with us our slow track and fast track processing a minute. And now let me just say, how many people here have not read enough of the Rare Leadership to know the slow and fast track? Okay, you have not. Okay, so for the people then who have not, we're going to have to review that a little bit. The fast track, yeah. So I'll have to walk out there and look at that screen every time to make sure that you're on the same screen that I am. The fast track is dominant in the right brain because in addition to value systems, your brain is full of clocks. And clocks actually move the information around at a certain rate. And the value systems and the clocks have to work together. So that when we're about to move something important through, the value system goes, pay attention, and then the clock puts it through its paces. So pay attention, somebody important to us is here. Okay, let's run it through. What are they good? They're important, are they good, bad, or scary? Is this an experience you can share with other people? Would anybody understand what you're talking about? And what would our people do with this? And how would we put it into words? And how would we respond if something was going wrong? And how would we know? All these processes go through, you know, in their right step as the clock moves it forward. But the value system has said we're about to process an experience. And in the fast track, you process experiences 6 times per second. And that's very important to know because as we look at the next part, which, did we get another screen up there that says slow track? Yes. Okay, thank you. You're my eyes and ears. is more on the left brain, and it runs at the speed of conscious thought. Now this is where language becomes difficult, because which of those is thinking? Well, they're both thinking. So, but when I say thinking, we almost only think about conscious thinking, because that's the one we can actually follow and watch. But the other is also thinking. It's just thinking that goes faster than we can consciously watch it. It's always ahead of us. And so because our slow track can't ever catch up, we sort of assume that we just know other things. So typically we say, well, this fast track stuff is just the stuff I know. Like, are you you? Yes. How did you think that? Well, I just know it. Right? Are you here? Well, how do you know? Well, I just know. What steps did you go to establish that you were here? I didn't. Yes, you did. Except you just can't go consciously fast enough to keep up with it. So we just think of these things as stuff that we know. In addition, there's a difference that the fast track is putting together a picture of everything as well as it can. So it's not focused. It just takes everything into account. You can't focus its attention on anything. It just brings everything in and says, does this fit together? But the slow track will focus. You can pick out an element of something and pay attention to that and ignore everything else that's going on. So if you notice someone is picking out an element of everything else and focusing on that and tuning out everything else that's going on, you're pretty sure that you're watching a fast or slow track. Slow track, yes, you're watching a slow track. And slow track is actually designed to look for everything going wrong. It's playing catch up. So if something went wrong on the relational side of things, it wants to figure out what went wrong, why, and what are we going to do about it. That's brilliant design, right? You're thinking too fast to keep up with on the one side, but if that screws up, something goes wrong. And the other side is going slower, and so, well, let's pick this out. Let's figure out what went wrong. So when the left brain is dominant, what do you suppose people think about most? Problems. They're problems focused. If you're really problem focused and that's all you're noticing, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel lousy, right? Now, if your relational stuff is all working really well, what do you think the slow track is going to be thinking about? Because we can't find any problems that make us feel lousy. Yeah, joy, peace, not the word I'm looking for quite yet. It's still breaking things down. So when you are joyful, what does your mind go about breaking down in terms of possibilities?
Creativity.
Creativity, yes, it's creative. So one of the interesting things that happened with neurofeedback is they found out that joyful people, creative people, have the left hemisphere buzzing. So they decided, we're going to give you neurofeedback and build up the activity in the left hemisphere. Only it didn't seem to work reliably. Why? Well, no, because depending on what your state your right hemisphere was in, if it was in a no joy and you got this problem, your left side going fast and more active, you had more problems in your mind. You became anxious, you became worried, you had all these things going on, every problem you could think of in the world. But if the right side was calm and peaceful and relationally in a good place, and then you speeded up the left side, you got creative. So it took them a while to figure this out, but you actually have to give by the neurofeedback to the right side of the brain to get it in a happy, stable state until it can, it's feeling like, this is going well. Then if you add the left side, you get a completely different outcome. You see the sequence in which things happen becomes very important to the outcome. Some of you may know Dr. Amen with his brain scans. Well, he operates as though the brain were completely modular. There's no sequence going on inside. Just this area does this area does this area does that. Among other things, I'm trained to read those brain scans, and so very often I have people bring me their brain scan from Dr. Amen and his report, and I recreate it using the sequential brain pattern. And every time the sequential brain would predict these further modules down the road will be off, in all the cases we run through, it's been 100% accurate. So he doesn't predict them, he just says, well, this is off and these are all off too. But if you look at it sequentially, the problem here always will show up in these other places as you're passing it forward. And it's interesting to me, reading all of the same brain scans in the same report, that we've never come up with a result where that didn't happen. Not one person that we've ever looked at didn't fit the pattern, which gives actual power to his report. But he's also done something interesting, which was with no logic whatsoever. He's looked at what worked and didn't work for treatment. And in his report it says, you should medicate this one first, and when it's stable, then you medicate this one next. And the sequence of medication that they've found, they said, we have found from our studies that you have to do it in this order, always follows the sequence of the brain. So you have to turn on, if it's level 1, you have to get that one working well before you do level 2, before you do level 3. So the logic that Shor brought to the brain matches what he has found without a logic. Wow. Just doing lots and lots of studies and seeing what happens. And so watching that overlap has been very interesting for me over the last couple of decades, that not once yet has a prediction been off. And what he's actually found fits this. So we get these additional studies then that say, and I also work with the connection with the EEG Institute, which is one of the leading neurofeedback organizations. They're the only ones that use Shor's theory. And at least part of the reason they do that is that back in the late 90s, I called them up and I said, the protocols you're using, because I know them, don't match what the theory says should happen. And they went out and read Shor and changed their protocols to match the way he said the brain worked, and all of a sudden the results improved dramatically again, because now we're just not looking at little areas of the brain, we're looking at, let's get this one going, then we'll get this one going, then we'll get this one going, and now now it'll be running. Now we can turn up the volume, because we've got it, all working nicely together. So the, let's see, I'm going to try to run through this, and I think maybe the easiest thing to do would be not to try to do this off of my my computer. I'll come out here where I can look back at the screen and we'll become good friends here. Yeah. So Mark has decided to call this process that runs things, this clock that moves things through there, the brain elevator. He's always, like he says, trying to figure out how to put the cookies on the lowest shelf. So he said, well, it's like an elevator, isn't it? It just moves things from the bottom of the brain to the top of the brain. And by the way, you know that the top of the brain is at the bottom of the brain. Just run through that if you weren't familiar with it. When your brain starts growing, grows off your brain stem, goes up, hits the top of your skull and goes, I need to go farther than this, so it bends and goes forward, hits the front of your skull, says I need to go farther than this, and it wraps around underneath, so it's just above your eyes. So if it actually had grown straight up, you'd have a skull that kind of goes like that. The cone head is exactly what we would have. But interestingly enough, that puts the top of your brain almost at the bottom of your brain physically. It's just wrapped around and gone that way. So that's why the elevator looks like something that would crash and burn right there, right? Because elevator that goes, yeah. Mm-hmm. So we get up there, and the number one level, the first thing the brain does is the attachment level. That's the level that looks at it and says, kind of what do you see? And I see something that's important to me. So if your brain looks at something and sees it, doesn't think it's important to you, it just dumps it. It doesn't process it on through. So it has to be personally relevant to me for the brain to take it on that first step. And then it sends it up to the assessment level, which says basically this is good, bad, or scary, or some combination of the three. And the assessment level actually has access to your brain's memory library. So it actually goes out and looks at that and goes, last time we saw something like this, or what do we have on file about this thing? And you know, if it says, you know, this experience with men is bad and scary, and what I'm looking at is a man, then you're bad and scary. So personally relevant, bad and scary things, yes, very personally relevant. Is it a joy thing? You know, clearly not. So personally relevant to us doesn't mean it's good. It just means based on my experience, here's what I'm anticipating right now, and I ought to pay attention to this. So the various value systems are kicking up there and looking things over. Now suppose, as you know probably by now, once the assessment center there forms an opinion and puts it in the library, it's always there. So every time it looks it up, it'll pull the same file. For the rest of your life, it'll pull the same file. So suppose that all the things around God, every time God seems to be brought up, it's in the context of something bad or scary. What will your brain pull out? Oh, God, back, topic is back. Personally relevant, yes. What do I have on file around God? Bad and scary. What do I normally want to do around bad and scary things? I want to go away. I want it to go away. I don't want to have anything to do with this. So before your brain has actually gotten any farther than this, it's already trying to figure out how to make anything related to God go away. Right? You're not even conscious yet. We've not hit yet here at the conscious level, because that happens at the next stage of the elevator. We get conscious, our first conscious thought. This part of the brain is in the preconscious area, and it runs to such an extent that this is still running during surgery when you're completely out for anesthetic. It's still running. It's making this assessment of everything that's happened to you. Is this good, bad, or scary? Is it personally relevant to me? If you switch this off, you're pretty much dead. It's that essential to you. If you pass out and you throw up while passed out, level 2 here will look back over the last thing you ate and give you an aversion to it. Say, that's bad and scary, don't eat that again. Now, my daughter-in-law just got pregnant. And so she's got morning sickness. And my son is going nuts because every last thing she ate before she threw up, she doesn't want to see again. And it's running out of the list of nutrients and things that she has on the list that they can eat. It's like, Dad, I can't get her to eat anything. She just looks at that and goes, oh, and heads to the bathroom. You know, even the color, he says, of the bowl that I served it in, she sees, I can't look at that bowl. Because this is going, that's bad and scary. That stuff makes you throw up. That bowl did it to me. You know, it's very unhelpful, you realize. But suppose you wanted to get somebody to stay away from the things of God. Wouldn't you make sure that all their early experiences with having anything to do with God were somehow associated with something bad and scary? This brain would not want to load God's awareness or presence into its brain if it could possibly help it. Before you ever think a thought, that we would call a thought, before you're ever consciously aware, that's what would be going on. Suppose you wanted people to do all manner of wicked things. Wouldn't you want to give them a dopamine good shot with whatever it was you wanted their brain to load in and value long before they were even thinking about it, every time they saw it? Would that produce an ideal model of someone acting like the person they were created to be? Or could this really skew your output? Especially if they were supposed to be a relational being, what would you want to put in their relational history so that when they looked at men, women, children, and everything else, their first reaction would be to associate that with something you would hope they would never think? Right? Now, if we are up against random world, once in a while this should happen. If we're up against a world that actually has intelligent enemies for our relationship with God, then you're going to find this stuff happening way above chance. I'll let you do your own calculations. Level 3 is attunement. Now this is because Marcus has to have A's, right? So it's attachment, assessment, attunement. Now attunement is intersubjectivity if you want sure. And it's also contingent communication if you like Siegel. So if you're looking at, some of you are looking at what are these terms you're dragging out, but some of you have been reading Siegel and Shore, and so you'll recognize intersubjectivity as the thing that the Freudians and the analysts would more likely call it, and then contingent communication. And what contingent communication means, well, first, intersubjectivity means that subjectively we feel like we're sharing this experience. And contingent communication means that what's going on with my mind about yours, about this, is the same thing that's going on at your mind about this at the same time. You ever had a wife or husband, something happened and you looked at them and they looked at you at the same time, and you're like, I know you're thinking exactly what I'm thinking about this right now. That is, if they looked like 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later, it wouldn't be a shared experience, but right there you're like, huh, do you see? That is what we call attuned communication. It's happening at the same time in both of our minds. We're coming to exactly the same point at the same place. It's a shared experience. This is the first level of conscious thought. So now we're aware of this. The other two levels, they happen long before we can actually even be aware of them. Now realize when I say conscious thought, it's not running at conscious thought speed. So it's still too fast for us to be consciously tracking it, but we know it happened. We're aware that it happened. When we have this moment that we go like, huh, yeah, and I look at my wife and it's like, I'm aware that I looked at her and I know what I was thinking when I looked at her and I know why I looked at her. I don't know how I figured it out that fast, but we're both aware that we just had a moment. So this level you're always aware of. The other level you can be out completely, it'll still run. This one we're now aware of. And then action, see he got his next A in there. This is acting like yourself. What is it like me and my people to do with this experience we've shared together? We've noticed it, we have evaluated it, we've shared it together, and now we want to say, how do we respond? And the most important part of how we respond is, who am I when this happens? It's not necessarily a case of, what action steps do I need to take? That would be the slower track, in terms of bringing it down to action steps. But do I know how to respond to this in a way that reflects me well? So every once in a while we hit one of those levels that we go, well, I just don't know how to act right now. So one of my examples here, you may have heard this before, in which case try to be amused by it again. My son was just about turned 12 and he came running out into the living room. He says, Dad, I think I'm growing a pubic hair. Do you want to see it? Now I know I was present. I knew he was looking at me, and it was a very significant moment. I knew that this is when being really a good father was called for, that this probably, all of the value systems are firing, going, this one's recordable. What you do next will not be forgotten by posterity. But when it got to level 4, how do me and my people act when it drew a total blank. There was not a thing on file. There wasn't a who you go and ask person on file. There wasn't anybody. I know they would know if I could call them up right now on file. It was like, if I turn to my wife and I say, honey, what should I say? There won't be anything on file over there either, see? Now, so everything had gone really well till we hit level 4. I knew we were engaged. I knew this is, value, all these sorts of things are running, and we have got a blank up here. Right? Does that make sense to you how that would feel? if all of you are running over like, why didn't he do this or say that? Well, that's because you've got a lot more on file than I did at that point in time. Now, my inner clock also told me that I didn't have a lot of time. So I tried to remember back, because you're all going to want to know what I did, right? Otherwise, we could go have lunch. But I tried to remember back from, could I reconstruct from what I know of myself as a father what might be an appropriate response under this? And the first thought that crossed my mind was, when they were young, we had taught them what was private information and what was public information. That could be real helpful right now. Because this somehow seems to cross that private-public thing. And so what I said was, I am delighted for you, but this is one of those private things that I want you to enjoy and track on your own. You can tell me about it from time to time if you want, but I don't need to see. Hey, okay, Dad. He's gone. My wife looked at me like, oh, we dodged a bullet on that one. She seemed to resonate with us. Something about that resembled maybe what we would do, but no great certainty. And so this is again how we learn from each other, and these are everyone, according to Shore, throughout your lifespan will be encountering places where you do not know what it's like you and your people to act now because you've never been here before. So one of the most profound things he said to me, at no point in the lifetime do you outgrow the need to have your people telling you what it would be like you to do right now. It just doesn't fit anyone's experience on Earth. There's no way to preload everything into there. We always need each other throughout our entire lifespan to be able to fill in these blanks. Now, had I handled it really badly, what I could have done is go talk to some other people who might have some ideas about what me and my people would do, and go back to my son and said, when you ran in the other day and I did this, that is so like not how we handle things. That's what happens when Dad's brain just shuts down and goes into, that was a pretty dumb thing for me to have said. But I checked with my people, and here's what they told me. When they said that, I thought, I wish I'd thought of that. It's so much better. So if you need to know this for your son someday, here's what I should have done yesterday, right? Or I could have gone to God in prayer and with some other people and said, well, let's see how God sees this situation, because none of us can figure it out together. But if we were in that kind of dialogue, we would be filling in a lot of these gaps, and we'd be going back and going what's called repenting, right? With theological terms. But repenting usually means I'm trying to feel like I'm really bad. Need for repentance means I need to recognize that I'm really bad. Repent before Christians came along meant rethink. I need to go back and rethink this one. So there was actually no moral tones attached to repentance before Christians got done. After a century of Christianity had been so moralized, the repentance meant I got to feel like a bad person and stop doing that, as opposed to that really needs to be rethought because that one came out wrong. And I think again as a community that's what we want to do. We want to be able to very easily repent and go, you know what? I'm going to rethink that, not because it came out so wrong, but just simply it didn't come out as good as it could have. Right? Any of you play a musical instrument and you played something and it came out all right, but it wasn't as good as you could have. You want to rethink that one because you're sure it could come out better than it did before. That'd be like a completely different attitude with which to practice life together, right? And the idea, again, as a life model is that from the biology all the way up to our interactions, we are trying to draw closer to the way it should have been, and teach that to each other and encourage that and make sure that the right value systems are on and fire in response to it, so that all of this becomes what we associate with being part of this relational network of our people that we know as being Christian. And we'll start to act like sons and daughters of our Father, right?